Some films are remembered for their stars. Others for their spectacle. But every once in a while, a production comes along that is remembered for what it dared to say, and what it cost to say it. The story behind the making of one of cinema's most ambitious war epics is not simply a tale of big budgets and famous faces. It is a story of calculated risk, psychological endurance, and an unshakable commitment to uncomfortable truth. Before a single frame was shot, the financial architecture of the production broke with convention entirely. Rather than pursuing traditional studio backing, the producer pursued international distribution deals in advance, locking in revenue across multiple markets before cameras rolled. The industry had never seen this approach applied at such scale. Skeptics were plentiful. But the strength of the underlying material and the reputation of those attached convinced enough buyers to take the leap. The result was a production with unusual creative freedom, and enormous pressure to justify the faith placed in it. The casting alone presented challenges that would have overwhelmed a lesser operation. Bringing together so many major international performers meant that schedules became a living puzzle with pieces that never quite stopped moving. Scenes were shot out of sequence. Dialogue was rewritten overnight. Continuity was managed through meticulous record-keeping rather than organic filmmaking rhythm. What audiences eventually saw as a seamless, coherent epic was stitched together from fragments captured across months of controlled chaos. The finished film conceals the disorder beneath its surface completely. Authenticity was treated not as a bonus but as a moral obligation. Real military personnel were integrated into battle sequences, not merely as background dressing but as active contributors whose training and experience shaped the behavior of every scene they occupied. Actors noticed the difference immediately. There is something in how a person who has actually trained for combat moves through space, a weight, a purposefulness, that cannot be approximated through rehearsal alone. The presence of genuine servicemen elevated the atmosphere on set from theatrical exercise to something approaching genuine reckoning with history. That sense of reckoning came at a psychological price. Months of immersion in a story defined by failure, loss, and the collapse of human ambition wore on cast and crew in ways that accumulated slowly but left deep marks. The subject matter offered no emotional relief. Every sequence required participants to inhabit defeat, to perform confusion, fear, and exhaustion without the comfort of a triumphant arc waiting at the end. Veteran performers later described the experience as genuinely draining in ways that distinguished this production from anything else in their careers. The themes of the story had a way of bleeding into the reality of making it. The physical demands matched the psychological ones. Filming on and around water introduced genuine hazard that safety protocols could manage but never eliminate. Actors in period-accurate military equipment had limited mobility in strong currents and cold conditions. Medical teams remained on constant standby. The tension captured in certain sequences was not entirely performance, some of the fear visible on screen was real, and the filmmakers were honest enough not to minimize that fact when reflecting on how those scenes came together. Perhaps the most revealing choice the production made was the one least visible to audiences: the decision to strip away heroism. War films carry expectations. Audiences arrive prepared for courage rewarded, sacrifice honored, and ultimate meaning conferred upon suffering. This film refused every one of those comforts. Victory, when it appeared at all, felt temporary and costly. Characters faced death without swelling orchestral accompaniment to tell viewers how to feel. The silence in certain scenes was not an absence of craft but a deployment of it, a deliberate withholding of emotional guidance that forced viewers to sit with what was happening unmediated and unprotected. The score itself embodied this contradiction. Composed by someone who had served during the actual events being depicted, the music carried both genuine reverence for the soldiers and clear-eyed mourning for what they were asked to do. Stirring martial themes accompanied scenes of advancing men, but those men were advancing toward disaster. The irony was structural, not accidental. Audiences left with melodies that felt simultaneously inspiring and heartbreaking, which was precisely the intended effect, a musical argument that bravery and wisdom are not the same thing, and that one cannot substitute for the other. The filmmakers distributed responsibility for failure across an entire command structure rather than indulging the dramatic convenience of a single villain. Nations were presented with unusual equity. No single flag dominated the narrative. Allies were scrutinized alongside one another. Civilians were shown as participants in their own history rather than decorative suffering. This even-handed approach reflected the historical reality that overconfidence had been collective and that the consequences had been shared without regard for rank or nationality. When veterans of the actual events watched the finished film, many described reactions that surprised them. The recreation of confusion and fear triggered responses they had not anticipated. Previous dramatizations had often imposed meaning on experiences that those who lived them remembered as meaningless in the moment, chaotic, terrifying, and unresolved. This production showed something closer to what survivors actually remembered, which made it harder to watch and more important for having been made. The production's influence on the films that followed it would be difficult to overstate. A generation of filmmakers internalized its lessons about restraint, honesty, and the dramatic power of showing failure without redemption. The war epic genre shifted on its axis. Future productions asked harder questions about what combat actually costs and what stories are worth telling about those who fight in them. That shift did not happen in isolation. It happened partly because this film demonstrated that audiences could handle difficult truths if those truths were presented with sufficient craft and respect. The title itself carried the argument. A phrase born from tactical frustration became a thematic statement about the limits of human ambition, a warning that applies far beyond military strategy and September 1944. Some endeavors exceed what is possible regardless of the courage invested in them. That is not a comfortable message. But comfort was never the point. Nearly 5 decades on, the film endures precisely because it refused to offer any.